The first transmission came through the static like a cry from another world, a soft, desperate voice trembling under the weight of a collapsing empire. To anyone who can hear this, please, this is Princess Elira of the Vereen Dominion. My people are dying. Our fleets are gone. The Ascendancy has breached the palace walls. We need help. Please. Then silence. Across the cold black of space, the message drifted, repeating on dying frequencies, bouncing from relay to relay, reaching no one who cared to listen. The Vereen Dominion had once ruled 37 worlds. Now it was a graveyard of fire and ruin. The Ascendancy, a coalition of gene-forged warriors and machine intellects, had devoured everything in its path. None dared oppose them, none except those who came from the cursed worlds. The Deathworlders. For centuries, the name Deathworlder was spoken only as a warning. Planets where everything could kill you, poisonous air, monstrous beasts, unstable weather, lethal diseases. Those who survived there were not ordinary. They were tougher, stronger, harder to break. And above all, they remembered. Humanity, the oldest and most feared of all Deathworld species, had withdrawn from the galactic stage long ago after the cleansing wars. The galaxy whispered that they'd gone extinct, that their fire had burned out, but the galaxy was wrong. On the edge of the Persean Veil, in the twilight shadow of a red dwarf star, an old relay blinked to life. The transmission reached an outpost built into the bones of a crashed dreadnought. Inside, a lone man sat in silence, his scarred hands wrapped around a metal mug. The voice crackled through the speakers, soft and trembling. "Please, this is Princess Elira of the Vereen Dominion." The man looked up. His eyes were pale gray, his expression unreadable. He'd heard countless distress calls before. Pirates, smugglers, whole worlds crying for help. He'd ignored them all. But something about this one. The quiet plea in her voice, the kind of fear that didn't come from pride or politics, but from the raw instinct of survival. It stirred something he thought long buried. He set the mug down, stood and walked to the console. The station creaked as he activated its old systems. The relay confirmed the signal's origin. Vereen Prime. Coordinates locked. Estimated population, nearly extinct. "Of all the stars," he muttered, voice rough like sandpaper. "You had to call me." He keyed in the jump sequence, and the engines of his ship, the Wraith, groaned to life. It wasn't much. A stealth cruiser built from scavenged parts, its hull patched and blackened. But it had teeth. Plasma cannons, rail batteries, and an AI core that had seen more wars than peace treaties. "Echo," he said. A flicker of light shimmered above the console. "Still pretending you don't care, Commander?" the AI asked in a tone that was almost amused. "Just plot the jump." "You know," Echo said, her voice softening, "every time you say that, someone ends up owing you a medal. Or a grave." He ignored her. The void shimmered, and the Wraith slipped into the worm path. Vereen Prime was a corpse of a world, once covered in marble cities and crystalline towers. Now it burned under a blood-red sky. The Ascendancy had already begun harvesting its core, draining oceans for fuel. From orbit, the devastation looked almost beautiful. A fractured gem bleeding into space. The Wraith emerged from hyperspace on the planet's dark side, hidden among the debris of fallen satellites. Echo began scanning. Multiple heat signatures near the capital. Most are hostile, but there's one beacon still active, transmitting the distress code. He adjusted his armor seals, the plates clicking into place with a quiet hum. "How bad's the atmosphere?" "Toxic in the lower layers, irradiated in the upper." "Your kind of party," he smirked slightly. "Then let's dance." The drop pod launched from the Wraith with a streak of fire plunging through the crimson clouds. Turbulence slammed against the hull, but he held steady, watching the flames lick the viewport. When it hit the ground, the impact threw dust and molten glass into the air. The hatch hissed open and he stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in black combat armor scorched from a dozen campaigns. His rifle hummed to life, its runes glowing faint blue. The palace was less than 2 kilometers away, half collapsed, surrounded by the corpses of golden-armored guards. Smoke curled from the ruins, and through it, shapes moved. Ascendancy drones, spidery things with glowing red cores. He moved like a shadow, each step precise, controlled. The drones never saw him until it was too late. One bolt through the core, one slice of a vibro knife, and silence returned. By the time he reached the grand hall, only the wind remained. Marble pillars had fallen, stained with soot and blood. The throne room was open to the night sky, the ceiling torn apart by orbital bombardment, and in the center, amid the wreckage, a woman knelt beside a shattered comms array. Her gown was torn, streaked with ash, but her bearing remained regal, even in ruin. She turned sharply when she heard footsteps, raising a ceremonial blaster that trembled in her hands. The man stopped a few paces away, his visor reflecting her frightened face. "Princess Elira," he said, voice distorted through his helmet. Her eyes widened. "You heard my call?" He nodded once, and answered it. You're not Vereen military." Her gaze flicked to the strange insignia on his shoulder, a circle of broken wings. "Who are you?" He hesitated. Then quietly, "Just a Deathworlder." Her breath caught. "That's not possible. Your kind, humanity, you're extinct." "Not quite," he said, lowering his rifle. "We just stopped showing up to other people's wars." Something in his tone, calm, weary, absolute, made her lower her weapon. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "There's nothing left to save." He glanced around the ruined chamber. "There's you!" Before she could respond, a tremor shook the palace. Echo's voice crackled through his comms. "Commander, you've got inbound signatures. Ascendancy assault mechs. Big ones. You'll want to move." He turned to Elira. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they can't find you." He led her through the broken halls, past burning tapestries and fallen statues. Outside, the air shimmered with heat and radiation, but he barely flinched. Every instinct in him was born of worse places. Jungles that ate men alive, storms that ripped flesh from bone. This was almost peaceful by comparison. They reached the edge of the royal gardens, now a wasteland of glass and smoke. In the distance, massive silhouettes moved. Ascendancy war machines, their limbs glowing like molten steel. The ground shook with every step they took. Elira froze. "You can't fight those!" He smiled beneath his helmet. "Watch me." He knelt, pressing a small device into the dirt. A faint blue pulse spread outward like ripples in water. Then he stood, his rifle humming louder, the air around him distorting as his armor powered up. The first mech came into view, its cannon charging with a shriek of energy. The Deathworlder didn't flinch. He sprinted forward faster than any human should have been able to move. The cannon fired, a beam of white fire that split the night, but he rolled beneath it, leaping onto the mech's arm, driving his blade into its core. It screamed as it exploded, shards of molten metal raining down. The other two opened fire, but he was already moving, weaving through debris, turning destruction into cover. Each shot he took found its mark. When the smoke cleared, 3 war machines lay broken, and he stood alone among the flames. Elira stared, speechless. You killed them all." He reloaded calmly. "They're just machines. The trick is remembering they're not gods." She followed him numbly as he led her to an old transport bay beneath the palace. Echo's voice returned, crisp but strained. "Commander, orbital scans show more inbound. Dozens. You won't make it to the exfil point." "Then we dig in," he said. Elira touched his arm, her voice soft but trembling. "Why are you helping us?" "You don't even know my people." He looked at her for a long moment. "Doesn't matter. You asked for help. Someone had to answer." And in that ruined hangar, beneath the red sky of a dying world, a forgotten soldier from a dead species stood between extinction and survival, because that was what Deathworlders did. They survived. They endured. And when the galaxy begged for mercy, they answered. Outside, the Ascendancy fleet darkened the horizon, descending like a storm of fire. The Deathworlder checked his rifle, exhaled slowly, and whispered to himself, "Let's remind them why they feared us." The sky over Vereen Prime burned like a wound that refused to close. The Ascendancy fleet was descending in full force now. Dozens of assault carriers blotting out the stars, their engines screaming like dying gods. The palace ruins glowed with their fire. The ground trembled beneath every impact as pods slammed into the shattered courtyards, disgorging endless waves of drones and soldiers. The Deathworlder stood on the cracked tarmac of the ancient hangar, watching the horizon turn to flame. His armor shimmered faintly under the red light, streaked with ash and blood. Princess Elira stood beside him, her breath shallow, clutching the folds of her torn gown like it might somehow protect her. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice breaking. "There's no way out." "There's always a way," he said quietly. He reached for the control panel near the wall, wiping off the dust. The ancient doors rumbled shut, sealing them in darkness. "We just have to make it ourselves." Echo's voice flickered through his helmet. "Commander, you've got less than 10 minutes before the Ascendancy's front line hits your position. I can provide orbital support if you upload targeting data, but it's going to level everything for a kilometer." "Do it," he said. "But not until I say. We'll hold as long as we can." Elira turned toward him. "You can't mean to fight all of them." "You'll die here." He checked the power cell in his rifle, the motion practiced, unhurried. "Wouldn't be the first time." Something in the calm of his voice silenced her protest. She watched as he set explosive charges around the hangar entrance, his movements efficient and precise. His breathing never quickened, his hands never trembled. This wasn't courage, it was something colder, older. As he worked, she found herself asking softly, "What's your name?" He paused for a heartbeat before answering. "Rhett." "Rhett," she repeated, tasting the name. "I thought your kind were gone." "They tried," he said simply. "Didn't take." She hesitated, studying him through the flickering emergency lights. "Why did humanity leave the galaxy?" "You could have ruled it." Rhett chuckled, a rough, humorless sound. "That's exactly why we didn't. Power changes things, turns monsters into gods, and gods into something worse. So we walked away before we forgot who we were." Elira's gaze fell to the floor. "And now you return. To save a world that isn't yours." He looked up at her, his expression hidden behind his visor. "Doesn't have to be mine to matter." The ground shook again, harder this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sensors screamed with incoming hostiles. Rhett grabbed his rifle, sliding a fresh magazine into place. "Stay behind cover. Don't move unless I tell you." She nodded, swallowing hard. The first wave hit like a tide of fire. The hangar doors glowed white under plasma bombardment, then blew inward in a storm of molten metal. Ascendancy shock troopers stormed through the breach. Tall, pale, cybernetic creatures with glowing veins and expressionless faces. They moved in perfect synchronization, weapons raised, their voices a cold chorus. Rhett moved faster. The first three fell before they even fired. A blur of motion, a burst of rail slugs through armor and bone. The rest returned fire, filling the hangar with searing light. Rhett ducked behind a wrecked transport, his armor sizzling under the hits. He popped out, lobbed a plasma grenade, and turned the front line into vapor. Elira watched in awe and horror as he fought. He was a storm given flesh, no hesitation, no mercy. Every movement had purpose. Every shot was fatal. But there was no triumph in his actions, only grim necessity. The second wave came harder. Mechs, drones, and Ascendancy officers clad in exoframes. Rhett triggered the explosives near the door. The blast tore through them, shrapnel embedding into the walls. He rolled through the smoke, firing bursts that cut down the survivors. Echo's voice cut through the chaos. "Commander, their reinforcements are minutes out. You can't hold that hangar." "I can hold until I'm done," he growled. He vaulted onto the fallen mech, using its frame for cover as he unleashed the last of his ammunition. When the rifle overheated, he drew his blade, a meter-long shard of alloy that hummed with electromagnetic charge. The Ascendancy troops rushed him, but he was already inside their lines, cutting through armor like it was paper. Sparks lit the darkness, each swing precise, almost graceful. By the time the last soldier fell, the hangar was filled with smoke and the stench of ozone. Rhett staggered slightly, his armor scarred and smoking. Elira rushed forward. "You're hurt?" He waved her off. Not yet. But when he removed his helmet, she saw the exhaustion etched deep into his features. His skin was pale and lined with scars. His eyes, gray and cold, burned with something she couldn't name. "Who are you really?" she asked. "No one fights like that." "Someone who's seen what happens when no one answers the call," he said quietly. Outside, the thunder grew louder. The ascendancy was surrounding them. Echo's voice came again, sharper now. "Rhett, if you don't give me the signal, there won't be a hangar to defend." He glanced at Elira, then at the detonator in his hand. "I'm not leaving without her." "There's nowhere to go," Echo said. "The orbital path is sealed." "You'll have to find another way off-world," Rhett frowned. "Suggestions?" "The underground tram system. Old Royal Transit tunnels, 30 meters below your position. I can map you a route, but it's unstable." "Do it," he turned to Elira. "We're leaving." "How?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the back of the hangar, kicked aside debris, and pried open a maintenance hatch. Beneath it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. He motioned for her to go first. "Move!" They climbed down as the sounds of battle echoed above. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of metal and rot. Lights flickered sporadically, illuminating walls carved with old Virine symbols. Elira's voice trembled. "I never thought I'd see these tunnels again. My mother said they were built during the First Wars, an escape route for the Royal Line." Rhett's boots clanked softly behind her. "Smart mother." "She's dead," Elira said quietly. "Ascendancy took her during the first siege." He didn't respond, but his silence carried weight. The kind of silence that understood loss intimately. They moved for nearly an hour before the tunnel opened into a vast chamber filled with derelict transports. Echo's hologram flickered to life beside them, her tone clipped. "You've got ascendancy units scanning the surface. They're triangulating your escape route. If you're going to get off this rock, it has to be now." Rhett moved to one of the old transports, checking the power conduits. "This one still has a live core. Can you remote start it?" Echo nodded. "Already on it." The engines sputtered, then roared to life. Elira climbed into the co-pilot seat as Rhett took the controls. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Someplace they can't follow." The transport lifted off, shaking dust from the ceiling. But as they ascended through the shaft, an explosion rocked the chamber. Ascendancy dropships breaching the tunnel from above. Gunfire rained down. Rhett cursed, gripping the controls tight. "Echo, reroute power to shields." "Working on it." Bolts of plasma seared past them. One struck the hull, sending alarms blaring. Elira cried out, grabbing onto the console. "We're not going to make it." Rhett gritted his teeth, pulling the transport into a near-vertical climb. The tunnel walls blurred past, the engines screaming. Then, with a final surge, they burst through the surface in a shower of fire and debris. The stars opened before them, cold, vast, and endless. But the relief was short-lived. Above them hung the Ascendancy fleet, its vast silhouette blocking their escape. Echo's voice was grim. "They've locked onto you." Rhett's jaw tightened. "Then we go through them." He pushed the throttle and the transport roared into the sky. Missiles streaked toward them, but he dove, rolled, and weaved through the storm of fire with impossible precision. Elira could barely breathe as the ship shuddered violently. "How are you?" she began. He smiled faintly. Deathworlder reflexes. They broke through the lower blockade, but a battlecruiser loomed ahead, its cannons charging. Echo's tone sharpened. "They're going to fire. You need to—" Before she could finish, a blinding beam lanced toward them. Rhett jerked the ship hard, but the blast grazed the hull. Systems screamed. The cockpit filled with sparks. The transport spiraled, falling back toward the planet in flames. Elira screamed as Rhett fought the controls, muscles straining. "Hold on!" he shouted. They hit the upper atmosphere like a comet, fire streaking around them. Alarms wailed. Echo's voice cut in, static-filled. "Brace for impact!" Then the world went white. When Elira opened her eyes, everything was silent. The transport lay half buried in the sand of a crimson desert, its hull smoking. Her ears rang. Beside her, Rhett stirred, blood running down his forehead. He blinked, coughed, and looked up at the burning sky. Still breathing, he muttered. Elira reached for him, shaking. You saved us. He gave a faint, tired grin. Wasn't planning on dying today. Above them, distant engines thundered. The ascendancy would come again. But for the moment, they were alive, and for the first time in her life, Princess Elira looked at the stranger beside her, the scarred, unbreakable man from a forgotten world, and realized what his kind truly meant. Deathworlders weren't survivors. They were the reason survival existed. ChatGPT said, the desert stretched endlessly beneath the twin suns, a sea of rust-colored dunes and whispering wind. The wreckage of the transport lay half buried in the sand, its hull scorched and bent, the faint smoke rising into the pale blue sky. Rhett sat on a broken wing, cleaning his rifle with slow, methodical motions. His armor was cracked in several places, his left arm stiff from shrapnel burns, but his eyes remained cold, clear, and focused. Elira sat nearby, wrapped in a torn thermal blanket from the emergency kit. The heat shimmered around them, and every breath tasted of dust and metal. Her once silken hair was tangled and streaked with soot, her dress torn and stained, but her posture still held the faint dignity of royalty. She had not spoken for hours. Finally, she broke the silence. They'll come for us. Rhett didn't look up. I know. And when they do? He slid the bolt on his rifle back into place. Then we make them regret it. She frowned, pulling the blanket tighter. You speak as if it's that simple. He glanced at her then, the ghost of a smirk touching his lips. For me, it is. Her frustration cracked through her exhaustion. You can't fight an empire, Rhett. You saw their fleet. You saw what they did to my world. Even you can't. Maybe not, he interrupted quietly. But I can make them bleed for every inch they take. Elira fell silent. There was no arrogance in his words, just certainty, like the calm of a soldier who had already buried too many doubts to count. Echo's hologram flickered into existence beside them, her projection faint and unstable. Commander, I've got bad news. The Ascendancy's using orbital drones to sweep the crash site. You've got about 40 minutes before they find you. Rhett stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Then we move. Where? Elira asked. He pointed toward the jagged horizon, where black mountains cut through the red sky. Those ridges. There's cover. Maybe even shelter. She hesitated, looking back at the wreck. There might still be supplies. Already checked, he said. We've got 1 water canister, 2 energy cells, and a medkit that's half dust. The rest's gone. She took a breath, steadying herself. Then lead the way. They began their trek across the sands, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Rhett's stride was steady, unhurried, conserving energy with the instinct of someone who'd survived worse. Elira stumbled often, unused to the terrain, but she refused his offer to carry her. Pride was all she had left to cling to. Hours passed. The suns burned overhead, and the desert rippled with mirage and silence. Rhett kept his scanner active, watching for movement. Every now and then, a flicker of metal on the horizon caught his eye. Ascendancy patrol drones, distant but relentless. As they climbed a rocky slope, Elira spoke again, her voice hoarse. You said once that humanity walked away from power. But I don't understand. How could a species so strong, so feared, just leave? Rhett paused on the ridge, his gaze sweeping the horizon. Because power wasn't the problem, he said quietly. It was what we became to keep it. He crouched, tracing a pattern in the sand with his glove. We fought wars that burned continents, built weapons that broke stars. When the Ascendancy rose, we didn't lose to them. We let them win. We left the galaxy behind because we couldn't stand what it had turned us into. Elira studied him, her expression softening. And now you return to fight again. He shrugged. Someone's got to clean up the mess. They reached a narrow canyon by nightfall. The temperature dropped sharply, the desert winds turning cold and sharp. Rhett led her into a shallow cave carved into the rock and set up a dim thermal lamp. The faint light flickered over the rough stone walls. Elira sank to the ground, exhaustion catching up with her. Rhett handed her the canister of water and turned to check his gear. You should rest, he said. She sipped carefully, then glanced at him. Do you ever rest? He chuckled softly. Not much point. After a long silence, she spoke again, her tone quieter. You lost people, didn't you? He froze mid-motion. Everyone does. But someone important. Rhett's eyes flickered toward the fire. For a moment his calm cracked. A little girl, he said. My daughter. She died when the Ascendancy purged Titan Base. Elira's breath caught. I'm so sorry. He nodded once. You're not the one who killed her. She looked at him, seeing not the warrior now but the man beneath the armor. The pain in his voice was old, buried under years of survival but still alive. Was she like you? She asked softly. He smiled faintly. She wanted to be. Said she'd grow up to fight monsters. Guess she did. The cave was quiet for a long while after that. The desert winds howled outside, carrying the faint echoes of war machines far away. When Elira finally slept, Rhett remained awake, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his knees. Echo's voice came softly through his earpiece. You could have told her nothing, you know. She deserves to know what she's asking me to fight for. You still think this is just about her? He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the mouth of the cave, where the first faint glimmer of drones flickered in the distance. Morning came harsh and fast. They left the cave before sunrise, moving deeper into the mountains. The terrain grew rougher, sharp rocks, steep inclines, and narrow passes. Rhett's scanner pinged intermittently, picking up movement behind them. By midday, the sound of engines echoed through the canyons. Rhett swore under his breath. They found the wreck. Elira's eyes widened. What do we do? He scanned the cliffs above them. We make them work for it. They reached a narrow pass where the rocks funneled into a natural choke point. Rhett motioned for Elira to take cover behind a ridge, then began setting up his rifle on a bipod. Stay down and don't move. Moments later, the first Ascendancy skimmer appeared, a sleek black craft hovering low, its scanners sweeping the canyon floor. Rhett waited, breath steady, finger on the trigger. When the craft drifted into the open, he fired once. The rail slug punched through its core, detonating the fuel cell. The explosion echoed like thunder. Within seconds, the air filled with the roar of engines. More skimmers descended, troops deploying in a cloud of dust and light. Rhett's rifle sang, each shot precise, deliberate. Drones fell, soldiers dropped. Plasma fire ricocheted off the canyon walls. Elira covered her ears as the battle raged. She had seen war from palaces, from distance and strategy tables, but never like this. Never up close, where the smell of burning metal mixed with the blood and sand. Rhett moved like something beyond human. He switched positions fluidly, every motion efficient. When his rifle ran dry, he drew his sidearm, firing with unerring accuracy. When the soldiers got close, he wrenched one's weapon away and turned it on his comrades. But there were too many. He fell back toward Elira, firing as he moved. Echo, he shouted. Status. Working on a distraction. She answered, her voice laced with static. Give me 30 seconds. We don't have 30 seconds. A plasma bolt grazed Rhett's shoulder, spinning him backward. Elira cried out, rushing toward him, but he pushed her behind cover. Stay down! Then the ground shook violently. A burst of static roared through his comm. Now! Echo shouted. The cliffside above them exploded, sending an avalanche of rock and dust crashing down on the Ascendancy troops. The canyon filled with debris and silence. Rhett coughed, dragging himself upright. Elira helped him to his feet. Are you? I'm fine, he muttered, though his armor was cracked and his breathing labored. They climbed through the dust-choked pass until the noise of battle faded behind them. When they finally stopped, Elira turned to him. You saved us again. He gave a tired grin. That's becoming a bad habit. But his humor faded as he glanced back toward the horizon, where smoke still rose from the canyon. They'll send more, he said. We need to reach the outer colonies. Elira frowned. Why there? Because if I'm right, he said quietly, there's a resistance forming. Humans, exiles, anyone the Ascendancy tried to erase. And they're waiting for a reason to fight again. Elira stared at him, the wind tugging at her hair. You think one man can bring them back? He looked at her then, his eyes like steel. Not one man. He reached into his pack, pulling out a small battered flag, black with a single silver star in the center. One name. He planted it in the sand. And for the first time since the ascendancy came, the banner of humanity fluttered once more under alien suns. The mountains gave way to a vast plain of red dust and broken cities. Once they had been thriving colonies, human and alien alike, connected by trade, culture, and hope. Now they were husks, burned out by the ascendancy's purge. Towers leaned like skeletal fingers against the horizon. Glass melted into rivers of obsidian. The air smelled faintly of ozone and ash, like the ghost of a storm that never ended. Rhett and Elira trudged through the ruins in silence, every step stirring the bones of old civilization. They had been walking for 2 days. The food rations were nearly gone. Elira's boots were torn, her hands raw from the climb through the desert and rock. She had stopped asking how much farther they had to go. She no longer expected a comforting answer. Rhett, though, was unyielding, moving with the same steady purpose he always did, as though fatigue were an inconvenience rather than a limitation. He walked like a man whose body had long ago made peace with pain. As the suns dipped behind the black horizon, they found shelter in the shell of an old transport station. Its walls were cracked, its glass shattered, but it offered shade and silence. Rhett scavenged through the remains, prying open a power panel until sparks danced across his gauntlet. Elira sat against the wall, hugging her knees. "You've done this before," she said quietly. He looked up from his work. "What, survive?" "No, save people." He paused, then closed the panel. The faint hum of light flickered through the station as the old power cell came to life. "I used to try," he said finally. "Didn't always work out." Her gaze softened. "You keep trying anyway." "Someone has to." The silence stretched between them again, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "When my father died, I swore I'd never ask anyone for help again. I thought it was weakness, to rely on someone else to fix what I couldn't, but you came when no one else did." Rhett leaned against the wall across from her, watching the flickering lights above. "You asked," he said simply. "That's all it takes sometimes." She smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen since they met. "That's a dangerous thing to say to a princess." "Good thing I don't care about titles," he replied with a smirk. Echo's voice crackled in his ear then, soft and urgent. "Commander, I've located a human signature cluster about 50 clicks north. Old relay signals, encrypted but definitely ours." "Looks like an outpost." Rhett straightened. "How recent?" "Hard to say. Could be survivors, could be ghosts." "Either way, we're going," he said. They left before dawn. The journey north took them through the heart of the ruins. Streets littered with rusted machines and shattered windows. The wind moaned through empty corridors, carrying whispers that might have once been voices. Elira stayed close to Rhett, her eyes scanning the shadows. At one point, she stopped beside a collapsed statue. The face had eroded long ago, but she recognized the symbol etched into its base. A sunburst crown, the royal crest of Vereen. She brushed the dust away with trembling fingers. "They destroyed everything," she whispered. "Not just people. History. Memory." Rhett placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Then we make new ones." They reached the edge of the ruins by mid-afternoon. Ahead lay a wasteland of twisted metal and dust storms, once a spaceport, now a graveyard of ships. Echo guided them through the wreckage, following faint heat signatures that grew stronger as they moved. At last, they came to a large cargo bay half buried in sand. The door was sealed, its metal scarred by battle. Rhett knelt, placing a hand on the surface. "There's power here," he murmured. "Someone's been keeping the lights on." He tapped a command into his wrist console. The door hissed, resisted, then groaned open. The darkness inside stirred, and a dozen rifles leveled at them instantly. "Hands up!" a voice barked. Rhett raised his hands slowly. "Easy, friend." "Human signal, not ascendancy." The voice hesitated. Then a figure stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing scavenged armor marked with the faded insignia of the old Terran Defense Corps. When he pulled off his helmet, Rhett's heart stopped. "Captain Vale," Rhett breathed. The man blinked. disbelief flashing across his scarred face. Rhett? No damn way. You're supposed to be dead. Guess someone forgot to tell me. The tension eased instantly. The rifles lowered. Vale clapped Rhett on the shoulder with a rough laugh. You stupid bastard. You really came back, Rhett grinned faintly. Didn't have much choice. Vale's gaze shifted to Elira, curiosity sharpening. And who's this? Elira straightened, regal even in rags. Princess Elira of Virene. Vale blinked, then let out a short whistle. Royalty. Didn't think any of you survived the purge. Barely, she said quietly. Vale nodded, his expression sobering. You'd better come inside. We've got a lot to talk about. The outpost was hidden beneath the cargo bay, a network of tunnels reinforced with salvaged plating and flickering lamps. Dozens of people moved through the corridors, humans, aliens, and hybrids alike. Some wore uniforms, others wore rags, but all bore the same look, hard, wary, unbroken. Survivors. Rhett walked through them like a ghost among ghosts. Whispers followed in his wake. Is that? It can't be. He's one of them. The old soldiers. A Deathworlder. Vale led them into a central chamber lined with holomaps and weapon crates. We've been holding out here for months, he explained, picking off patrols, intercepting Ascendancy supply lines. But without ships, without a rallying point. It's been survival, not war. Rhett studied the maps, his jaw tightening. That changes now. Vale raised an eyebrow. You got something in mind? Rhett nodded. The Ascendancy fleet that hit Virene is still in orbit. If we can hijack one of their signal relays, we can broadcast a message on the old human bands. The kind that wakes people up, Vale frowned. You think anyone's still listening? Rhett met his gaze. They will be when they hear who's talking. Elira stepped forward. And if we send that message, the Ascendancy will come. They'll burn everything to stop us. Rhett turned to her. Then we make sure the fire spreads faster than they can put it out. The room went quiet. The survivors looked between the princess and the Deathworlder, the weight of their words settling in. For the first time in decades, the word hope didn't sound like a lie. Vale broke the silence with a grim smile. You always did have a talent for impossible plans, Rhett. Best kind, Rhett replied. Preparations began immediately. Rhett oversaw weapon checks and defensive lines. Vale coordinated the engineers to retrofit old drones into decoys. Elira helped organize the civilians, her voice calm and steady despite her fear. That night, as the others slept, Rhett stood alone on the upper deck, watching the desert winds sweep across the horizon. Echo's voice came softly in his ear. You're really going to do it, aren't you? He didn't look away from the stars. It's what I came for. This isn't just another mission, Rhett. If you send that signal, the whole galaxy will know humanity's back. You'll start a war. He exhaled slowly. Then it's time they remembered who we are. By dawn, everything was ready. The strike team, 15 soldiers, Rhett at the front, boarded a stolen skimmer and cut across the desert toward the relay tower. Elira insisted on coming despite his protests. You'll need someone who knows the encryption systems, she said. And I won't sit in the shadows, while others fight for my world. He didn't argue. Further, they reached the relay, station just before sunset, a towering spire of black alloy surrounded by Ascendancy sentries. Rhett signaled the team to fan out. The air thrummed with tension. The mission was simple. Breach the core, upload the signal, get out alive. When the first shot rang out, the sky exploded in fire. Rhett moved like lightning, cutting down soldiers as the team surged forward. Plasma bolts lit the sand, bodies fell, and the relay tower shuddered under the assault. Elira sprinted through the chaos, fingers flying across the console as she bypassed security locks. Almost there, she shouted. Echo status, Rhett barked. Ascendancy reinforcements inbound. You've got 5 minutes before they hit your position. Plenty of time. The console sparked, then the display turned green. Elira looked up, breathless. It's ready. Say it. Rhett stepped forward, removing his helmet. The wind caught his hair, the dust stinging his face. He leaned toward the transmitter and spoke, his voice steady and low. This is Rhett Koran of Earth. To any human still listening, to any who still remember what we were, you're not forgotten. You're not broken. The galaxy tried to erase us. They failed. We are the storm they buried, and we are coming home. The signal went live. Across the void, long-dead relays flickered to life. Old satellites turned toward the voice. Abandoned outposts caught the echo. And in the silent corners of the galaxy, lights began to spark in the dark once more. Elira looked at him. Awe and fear mingled in her eyes. You just lit a fire that can't be put out. Rhett gave a tired smile. Good. Then the Ascendancy fleet roared over the horizon. The night sky turned to war. The stars above burned white and furious as the Ascendancy fleet descended on the desert. Their warships tore through the sky in streaks of blue flame, thunder shaking the ground like the wrath of ancient gods. The relay tower stood defiant against the storm, its signal still pulsing out into the void, a heartbeat of defiance echoing across forgotten worlds. Rhett stood at its base, weapon in hand, armor blackened and cracked. Around him the resistance scrambled for cover. Shouts drowned beneath the roar of engines and artillery. Echo! He shouted into the comm, voice harsh through static. What's the nearest fallback point? None, her voice replied. They've encircled you completely. I can jam their targeting for a few minutes, but after that, then a few minutes is all we need. He looked at Elira, who was kneeling by the console, hands flying across the keys as she reinforced the transmission. The light from the hollow screen bathed her face in gold and blue. She didn't flinch when the ground exploded nearby, didn't even look up as shrapnel sprayed across the stone. They're trying to shut the signal down, she said through gritted teeth. If I stop, even for a second, it dies. Then don't stop, Rhett said, raising his rifle. I'll hold them. The first wave came fast, drones descending like a cloud of steel insects. Rhett fired in controlled bursts, every shot finding its mark. The air filled with the hiss of plasma, the sand erupting into glass under the heat. He moved without hesitation, weaving between cover, his every motion practiced and precise. Contact on the west flank. Vale's voice came over the comm. We're getting slaughtered out here. Hold the line, Rhett barked. If that signal drops, all of this means nothing. He ducked as a drone exploded overhead, the shockwave knocking him to one knee. His armor's warning lights flashed red. Internal damage, minor. Adrenaline spiked through his veins, old instincts roaring to life. The Deathworlder was awake again. Then came the soldiers, Ascendancy elites in mirrored armor, their weapons humming with energy. They advanced in formation, their movements inhumanly precise. Rhett met them head-on. The first fell to a burst from his rifle. The second he met in close quarters, slamming his shoulder into its chest and firing point-blank. The third drove a blade of plasma into his side, but Rhett didn't slow. He wrenched the weapon away and used it to cut the soldier down. Blood ran down his armor in thin crimson rivers. He barely felt it. Pain was a language his body had long since learned to ignore. Behind him, Elira's voice rang through the chaos. Signal strength holding at 70%. The network is responding. Rhett, it's working. He risked a glance back. Then keep it that way. A sudden flash of movement. Then Vale was beside him, firing an assault rifle scavenged from one of the fallen soldiers. You've still got a talent for suicide missions, he shouted. Wouldn't be fun otherwise, Rhett yelled back, taking down another drone. They fought side by side as the Ascendancy pressed harder, wave after wave, a relentless tide of mechanical precision. Each time they pushed forward, more of the resistance fell. The sand turned black with ash. Then the sky split open. From the largest of the enemy ships, a beam of energy began to form. A planet-breaker cannon, the kind used to vaporize entire cities. Rhett looked up, eyes narrowing. They're not trying to capture us anymore. Elira saw it too. Her fingers froze on the console. They're going to destroy the relay. Not if I can help it. Rhett, no. But he was already moving. He sprinted through the chaos, dodging fire, leaping over debris. His body screamed in protest, but he didn't care. He reached the relay's auxiliary control node and tore open the access panel. Inside, glowing conduits pulsed with energy. Echo, he said, panting. Link my suit's power core to the relay. Override failsafe. That'll kill you, she said flatly. Not if you're quick. Rhett, do it. The connection engaged with a surge of energy that nearly tore him apart. His armor flared with light as the relay drew from him, pulling power directly from his life support and weapon systems. Pain lanced through every nerve. His vision blurred, but he stayed upright, forcing the charge through. The signal spiked. One last burst of raw strength amplified into the void. Across the galaxy, dormant stations lit up. Old warships in forgotten docks powered on. Beacons from distant colonies began broadcasting again. For the first time in centuries, humanity's network stirred to life. The Ascendancy fleet reacted immediately. The cannon above fired, a beam of pure annihilation descending toward the desert. Rhett staggered toward the console where Elira was still typing. "Cut the link," she cried. "You'll die." He shook his head, voice raw. "If this works, it won't matter." She grabbed his arm, tears streaking through the dust on her face. "Please, don't make me watch you die too." He looked at her then. Really looked. And for a heartbeat the world fell away. "You won't," he said softly. "You'll see what comes after." He ripped her hand away and shoved her toward Vale. "Get her out of here! Rhett, go!" Vale dragged her back as the cannon's light consumed the sky. Rhett turned back to the relay, his body shaking under the energy overload. He planted his feet, raised his arms, and roared, a sound that was not just pain, but defiance. When the beam hit, it split. The relay core flared brighter than a sun, absorbing and redirecting the energy outward. The explosion that followed ripped the desert apart, a wave of light and fire that reached orbit and shattered the Ascendancy fleet above. For miles, the sky burned. When the dust finally settled, the relay tower was gone. In its place was a crater of glass and molten rock. The survivors crawled from the wreckage, dazed and trembling. Vale pulled Elira to her feet, his armor blackened and cracked. "Rhett," she whispered, staring at the ruin. He can't be gone." Vale said nothing. But even as they stood there, Echo's voice crackled weakly through the comm. "Transmission complete. Global link stabilized. Humanity has heard." Far above the world, the broken fragments of the Ascendancy fleet drifted silently. But on distant planets, something incredible was happening. In the dark corridors of derelict stations, lights flickered on. Colonies long thought dead began transmitting. Ships launched from hidden docks, bearing the flag Rhett had raised in the sand. The human enclaves, forgotten, scattered, and beaten, were rising. Elira felt it too. In her bones, in her heart, the pulse of something vast and alive awakening across the stars. "He did it," she whispered. "He brought them back." Vale looked to the sky. "Then we make damn sure it wasn't for nothing." They gathered what survivors they could and began moving toward the northern ridge. Beyond it lay the wreck of an Ascendancy cruiser, one of the few still intact. It would be their way off-world, their way to spread the fire Rhett had ignited. As night fell, the desert cooled, and the stars came out. Millions of them, burning like a promise. Elira stopped at the edge of the crater, staring into the faint glow where the relay had once stood. The wind whispered softly through the dunes, carrying the smell of ozone and iron. "I won't let your story end here," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "You saved a world once. Now we'll save them all." She turned away, the flag still clenched in her hands. Weeks later, the signal Rhett had sent reached the edges of the galaxy. In the shadow of broken moons, in the depths of old battlefields, humans who had hidden for centuries began to rise. They came from every world, every exile, every forgotten place. Soldiers, farmers, engineers, refugees, all answering the call of a single voice that had dared to defy extinction. The Ascendancy tried to suppress it. They burned worlds and silenced relays, but it was too late. Humanity's flame was burning again, and this time it would not go out. From the outer colonies, fleets began to gather. Old warships refitted and renamed. Across the void, a phrase began to spread among those who remembered, whispered like a prayer. "The Deathworlders have returned." And somewhere, Deep in the static of the newly restored networks, a faint voice lingered, a recorded message left in the relay's final transmission. This is Rhett Corin. If you're hearing this, it means humanity still breathes. Don't let them forget what we are. Don't let them take the stars from us again. Illyra stood aboard the bridge of their captured ship, watching as the first human fleet assembled beyond the clouds. The galaxies that had once feared humanity now trembled again, not from domination, but from the knowledge that they had failed to kill the impossible. She closed her eyes, hearing his words in her memory. "You won't see me die. You'll see what comes after." And she smiled softly through the grief. The galaxy had tried to erase humanity. Now it would learn to pray for their mercy.